Hi everyone, I hope you're well. I wanted to talk today about a very big topic and quite a sensitive topic for me. When I talk about this stuff, sometimes I really get I get quite I just get very sad and emotionally overwhelmed and stuff. And I know that's the case for most of the time when I talk about autism and how it affects my life and stuff. But I'm going to go through it, just to keep you guys informed and give you some of my own thoughts on it. And so I'm going to be talking about autism, unemployment, and homelessness today. So let's get started. So how many autistic people are employed? So it varies by country a little bit, but like the latest kind of data from the UK suggests that the employment rate for autistic people is 29%. And by employment, that means any form of employment. That includes part-time employment, that includes like self-employment, whatever, right? Not just like a 9 to 5. And that's 29%. So that means over 2/3 of autistic people are unemployed. And that's just one source. And that's one of the most optimistic sources. Other sources say that the unemployment rate among autistic people can be as high as 85%. That's 17 out of 20. And of course, I don't have a source for this. Of course, my counsellor could be BSing about this, but she told me the other day that for like younger people who have autism or some other learning disability, the employment rate is actually around 5%, which is just extremely hopelessly low. And these employment statistics, especially when you compare that 29% to the employment rate for disabled people in general, and that's over 50%. So even among the cohort of disabled people, for autistic people, the unemployment rate is like still 20% lower. So it's extremely low, whatever way you look at it. There isn't really much optimism out there. And also, when you say this to people, a lot of the time, one cope that people will come up with is, "Oh, don't worry, Bruno. That's just the people who are level 3 who are nonverbal and have intellectual disabilities and so on, right?" But actually, most autistic people do not have an intellectual disability. Most autistic people would not be considered level 3. They'd be considered level 1 or level 2. It's only around like 10 to 20% of autistic people who are level 3, and so that just means just no independence at all. And most autistic people are like me. We're just spurgs, man. And so like most of these autistic people who are unemployed, they are still people like me, people who have intellectual capacity to be productive, to be useful, but just aren't able to obtain and hold down a job, basically. And I want to discuss some implications of this. So in some cultures, including cultural background I come from, really, there's extreme prejudice against unemployed people. Unemployed people are often all tarred with the same brush, lumped together as lazy, exploitative, so exploiting socialism or whatever to not have to work, faking conditions, and I'm gonna talk about that in more detail in a second. And generally just lazy, like sloth, right, is a deadly sin. And the cultural background I come from, there is just if you're unemployed, people just look down on you, basically. I remember I'm going to just give you a personal anecdote here. So when I was younger, I didn't actually hear him say it directly. I don't recall him saying it to me directly, but my mum told me that my granddad kind of said something along the lines of, like, I don't care what you do with your life, what job you have, but if you're unemployed and you don't get a job and stuff, like, I don't want to talk to you. And that's something that stuck with me for many years, because I get along with my granddad. I have a lot of like respect for him and stuff. He's done really well for himself, and yeah, he's always like treated me nicely and stuff. But I just kind of think, is that actually like what he thinks about me and stuff? And so I get into this kind of, like, you always gotta like lie to family members sometimes about how okay things are going for you. I don't know if any of you can relate to that, but yeah, and it's not just to do with family prejudice, it's a wider societal thing. You have even it's from the family level to the political level. You have politicians going on, like the way they talk about people who are unemployed or underemployed due to neurological disorders. It's just but people are just, there's just such a huge misunderstanding. And yeah, one of those reasons, right, is because autism is not always immediately obvious. It's not always immediately obviously debilitating, because, and so, there's no obvious, like, physical appearance difference, just, maybe you look poorly dressed because you're wearing, like loose clothes and stuff that you're comfortable in to accommodate your sensory needs and that, right? Like, there isn't that widespread awareness of how autism can present, right? And so people can just get judged, just for, they just their traits get misinterpreted as being like just lazy bums, basically. And so being autistic, because the presentation isn't always immediately obvious, and there's a huge lack of awareness in society in general, that can make autistic people especially prone to being lumped as lazy, fakers, and just bad sloths, basically. And yeah, that's pretty bad. And if you contrast this to Down syndrome, so I've been looking at a few kind of sources out there, and it seems that in some countries like the UK, the Down syndrome employment rate is pretty comparable to autism. It's about 20-ish%. But then if you look at countries like Australia and United States, where there's lots of support in place and that, like, the employment rate is actually more around 50%, like it would be with most other disabled people. And also people with Down syndrome, just because like their presentation is immediately obvious that they have Down syndrome, and they usually have an intellectual disability and so on, right? And people are much more aware of that and understanding. And so it's much rarer for someone to judge a person with Down syndrome for being or underemployed compared to someone who has autism. And so, yeah, that's something to think about. And like this, this thing, just having underemployment or even underemployment, like that can lead to huge issues of self-worth. And I know that certainly has affected me over the years. It's like I said, like I kind of bullshit to my family sometimes about like how busy I am and stuff, right? Even like bullshit myself sometimes, I think, I don't know. And just feeling really far behind. And yeah, it sucks, right? And, like when you look at the employment rate statistics for autism and you compare them to like dating success statistics effectively for autism, like they're pretty comparable, they're pretty similar, right? It's around that 20% kind of mark. very broadly, right? And when I think about that, I realise that a lot of the problems that we talk about in the autistic bleak pill and stuff, why, autistic men struggle to get girlfriends and stuff, those are the same reasons why lots of us are under or unemployed. And yeah, there are lots of copes out there, especially online, anonymously, about why would you want to be a wagey anyway, work a 9 to 5, be a wage slave, and stuff. And I get that, and it can be a nice way to think about stuff sometimes, especially if you're in that position where you're unemployed or your options are extremely limited and stuff. That it's because I'm autistic, because I have a disability, then that means I don't have to work, quote, or you don't put that much pressure on yourself, and you're also working is a bad thing, having a job is bad. And I guess that kind of leads you to the whole kind of thinking about almost political, right? It's the West is collapsing, right? The whole Chud meme and that, and it's it's all corrupt and stuff. But I get that, but isn't that ultimately just cope when you're kind of thinking about it that way, because there are loads of downsides to being a NEET or severely underemployed. One of them is poverty. And because sure, even if you're lucky enough to get on Spurg bucks and stuff, you're not going to be you're not going to be having as much money as if you were working full time usually, and even after taxes, right? And also this is something that my mum says to me a lot, which it makes me feel sad when she says it, because I know that she's partly right. But workplaces are a good way to meet people, right? So you just have those things I always complain that I only have a limited number of friends and stuff and struggle to meet people and that. But it's lots of people, if they're working together, colleagues, they'll go out for drinks after work and stuff, right? And socialize, and even that whole kind of cliche of if there's a nice cute girl working in the office and you go and talk to her and ask her for coffee and then start a relationship, right? There are those things. And yeah, that, a black pill cope to that is that if you're autistic, you'll be socially rejected anyway, even if you are in that position. And yeah, that might be true. And when I have been in those positions, because I'm not a total NEET and stuff, I have had times where I've been totally unemployed, but in my very limited experience, where I've had the opportunity to be in that position, I haven't made friends with work colleagues ever, really. I don't know how to, unless people come and approach me and basically ask to be my friend. I just don't know how. I just don't have those social skills, and that's the same reason why. Well, that's that's one of the contributing factors to my severe underemployment, right? So I've spent loads of time over the years, looking for different jobs and stuff and applying to them, and even for neurotypicals, right? I see it all the time, right? People complaining about how hard it is to get a job, to get an interview. I sent out hundreds of applications, bro, and stuff. And you hear 700 people applied to this one position and stuff. And so even for neurotypicals, the job market can be extremely competitive and hostile, and feeling like it's against you, right? But then when you're autistic and you have that added disadvantage that, you're not, I'm not able to network properly. I'm not able to, I don't know how to talk to people properly. And, if I do something weird and fall in the uncanny valley, like I basically just get immediately rejected. And so, and you got that added disadvantage as well as just a hostile, like job market. And it's like, yeah, no wonder some of us don't stand a chance. It's bad enough if you're neurotypical, like I said. But then if you're, if you got the added Spurg problem, then no wonder. And I guess that brings me to another important point about nepotism, right, and networking. Like, one of the things that these, even in neurotypicals say, like, when they're talking about, like, looking for a job and career and all that stuff, right, they kind of say, it's not what you know, it's who you know, right? And that's how a lot of even a lot of neurotypicals, they kind of have to go through nepotism to secure employment. And I think that's the same for autistic people, because, of course, like I said, the job market is extremely hostile to autistic people, to be frank, and it's just unwelcoming, right? Like, yeah, it's extremely unlikely that, even if you manage to get an interview, most interviewers just Spurg filter you anyway, unless they want you for a diversity hire. But even, like, the whole diversity hire thing, like, I mentioned this before, but in the UK, under the Equality Act and stuff, like, there are meant to be, like, protections that, basically, like, allow like, if you have a disability and stuff, to, like, be put to the front of the queue for interviews and stuff. And that doesn't seem to be that enforced. And also, like, with the whole, like, diversity quota culture that we have at the moment, where it's like, you say, oh yeah, we got X percentage from a, disadvantaged background, which I guess would include autistic people. But I think it looks better, right, if actually the disadvantaged background people are, like, ethnic minorities or people with obvious physical disabilities, because then, it's immediately obvious. And, of course, coming back to the whole lack of understanding, right, of autism and so on, like, people, even if, like, officially, like, like, we should be considered as diversity hires, like, in practice, sometimes we're often overlooked, because it's like, oh, autism isn't real, you just gotta stop being lazy, bro. There's that whole boomer attitude. And we just get overlooked a lot because of that, when actually, no, like, no, most autistic people are much more disadvantaged than, like, any, like, ethnic minority, at least in the West, and again, that's gonna get super political, so I don't want to go down that road today. But yeah, so because of all this stuff, like, and before I move on, I just want to say that, like, there's nothing it's not there's nothing I would love more, but, like, do people seriously think that, like, most of us autistic people are truly happy just, like, waking up every day, or, like, almost every day with nothing to do, sometimes every day with nothing to do, like, being extremely impoverished and having to rely on government assistance just to, like, exist? Like, no, I would love nothing more than to have a normal life. Yeah, sure, even if I have to work hard and stuff, like, whatever, have a normal life, have a normal social circle, have, normal, like, relationship and dating experiences, be, totally independent, and, do stuff I'm proud of every day. Like, that would be nice, and I'd feel much better about myself. And because I'd just be higher up in the social hierarchy and that. But there just doesn't seem to be, like I don't know how to get there, and it's not a choice. Like, I would give a left bollock to have that type of normal life, but it's just not accessible to me, and it's not accessible to most autistic people, to be honest. And so some of us, to varying degrees, and varies a lot depending on where you are and stuff, and just luck, really. We're often on neat bucks or spurg bucks, whatever you want to call it. And like, of course, there's huge prejudice against people doing that and stuff, especially because just the lack of awareness again. And there's also huge, like, insecurity with that. You can have things like, political changes, lack of understanding by assessors, and masking, so you can fuck yourself over, can just, make that whole, that whole thing just really unreliable, and you can just be really insecure. And just from just underemployment, like financial insecurity, ultimately that can be a cause of homelessness, right? And it's something that isn't talked about a lot, but autistic people are disproportionately homelessness. Statistics show that the proportion of autistic people who are homelessness is something between 12 and 20%. And that's just kind of like obviously autistic, right? Because people mask and stuff. And that's compared to, in the US, I believe homelessness is about 1% of the population. In the UK, I'd be astonished if it was that high. I think it's much lower than that. I think it may be even closer to 0.1%. And so you have this huge disproportionality of homeless people who are autistic, and that's crazy, and nobody cares, nobody gives a shit, like, because I think another thing that can exacerbate this problem is that, like, a lot of, there's a kind of like a stereotype about homeless people, right, that they have, like, they're kind of schizos, they have erratic behaviour, they're mad, and it's like, well, surely, maybe those erratic behavioural traits are just like autistic traits, right? Because it's so common for a homeless person to be autistic, and and of course, the converse is true, right? It's extremely common, well, not extremely common, but quite common, and just too common for an autistic person to be homeless, and nobody gives a shit. Nobody cares. And I think the way that homeless people are treated, especially in the UK at the moment, is pretty disgusting. Like, there is not much help and support out there at all. Like, the previous government was even going on about, like, making it illegal to have urban camping, making urban camping illegal. So, like, even a tiny bit of shelter that, like, a homeless person might be able to get from, like, living in a tent, they're not allowed that. The government's going to take that away, or, like, they're going to fine a homeless person. Like, if a homeless person had, like, money to pay a fine, they wouldn't be homeless. Like, it's just disgusting. It's just homeless people are often dehumanized. And another thing that, people criticize homeless people for, which is just criticizing homeless people in itself is just disgusting. But, like, they'll kind of talk about, they're all doing drugs, or they're all alcoholics and stuff. It's like, yeah, okay, but if you were sleeping rough in, like, the cold British winter, like, you didn't have your own private space, you were being judged and abused by people almost every day, yeah, sure. And like, you could get some cheap vodka to numb the pain. Like, yeah, you would. I don't blame homeless people for doing that. You need something to cope with that awful existence. I have a lot of empathy for homeless people. And, I wish I could do more to help. Like, there aren't that many in my area, but, sometimes I do think I wish I could do more to help, like, I think if I ever saw a homeless person, like I would, I'd offer to buy them food or even just give them money and say, yeah, just go get some cheap cider or vodka just to numb the pain for a bit, dude. I get it, like, because that could be me one day. Luckily, it's not me at the moment, and that's for various reasons, but, it's much more likely that I'll be homeless than a neurotypical person in the future. And so, I've always kind of even though I've never really, like, explicitly researched it until recently, like, I've always kind of, like, implicitly, like, assumed, thought that, and that's just because, like, it's going to be harder for me to be financially independent, to have an income. It's going to be harder for me to, like, have my own place and stuff, and, those factors, like, so I get it. And, like, discussing all these statistics on, like, employment and, like, living situation and stuff for autistic people, like, like, sometimes I think that's comforting, but, it's not just me who's, like, struggled to get or hold down a job or whatever. It's most autistic people, but like, it's still really sad, because, like, most of us don't have an intellectual disability. Lots of us are really intelligent, and historically, lots of people with autistic traits have done amazing things, been extremely productive, and been extremely prosperous. And it's really sad that the employment rate for people with autism, even high-functioning autism, is comparable to people with intellectual disabilities, with disabilities in general. And, it does say a lot about society and how, just, like having, like, being good, like, I mentioned this before, but a lot of the time, like, growing up, I was kind of told by older people, I guess, but, like, if you can get good grades, like, your life's going to be sorted out, Ross, just work hard in school. That's what my granddad would always say to me, just, work hard, because he didn't work hard in school, but, he still managed to, like, do fine for himself, but he was always like, work hard in school, Harrison, and you'll be, you'll be fine, you'll regret it if you don't. And it's like, I guess if I didn't, maybe I'd be in an even worse position. Maybe I would be a total NEET, because, like, I wouldn't have anything to offer. I wouldn't have social or intellectual skills to offer to the world. I'd be less qualified and stuff. But it hasn't done much. There are so many people out there with much less education, much worse grades than me, who are working full-time, who are gainfully employed, and just all that stuff, right? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, I would trade my grades for neurotypicality, of course. And, I mean, I shouldn't, like, I get when people get pissed off when I say stuff like that. But, like, I get it. I shouldn't have to, and... Yeah, because of how the cultural shifts and stuff nowadays, like, and it's reflected in the hostile job market that I've been talking about, right? Like, social networking is so much more important than good grades nowadays. It's so much more valued. What do I see happening in the future, like, for me personally? Like, I don't know. Whenever I think about it, I just get sad and I just feel like crying, to be honest. Because, I'm in my mid-20s now, and I have so many gaps in my CV. Like, apart from, like, good grades in school and stuff, my CV looks like a steaming pile of shit. And I know that that's how most employers see it. Because I don't have, most neurotypical people my age have been, like, employed, or, even certainly in the past, would have been employed for 3, 4, 5 years by now, have all that, like, full time, have that experience to put down and stuff. And, they have always natural social skills that they're not, like, to get through the Spurg filter in interviews. And I just can't compete with that. I can't compete with that. I think the only way that, like, people like me are going to be able to, get, like, consistently, like, hold down full-time jobs, and that is with accommodations, is with more understanding, is with help and support. And, like, in some countries, I think I mentioned this, but you have, like, like, schemes to help people with Down syndrome and stuff to get employed and stuff. And I guess it probably applies to autistic people as well, especially in like, Australia, which is really good for like, help and support for autists. Not perfect, of course, but, I'm comparing it to the UK. So, comparatively, I think Australia's doing well. And the rate is higher there. And, people like me, like my flavour of autism, like, we would stand more of a chance, to be honest. Like, we'd have a fighting chance, because, there is just, like, I just get so, like, intimidated and feel so hopeless, and I feel so sad, and I really just, like, hate myself and have such low self-worth when I compare my, like, my work history or whatever to most other people. It's pathetic. I'm pathetic. And, I know that there are lots of people out there who think that of me as well. It's not just me. It's not just all in my head, like, low self-esteem, bro. Like, no, there are people who look at people in my position, really look down and think we're just pathetic, useless pieces of shit. And, like, it's brutal. It's just so brutal. And, it's not nice. Like, we try and cope, right? We try and cope, and I try and cope, and sometimes I cope all right, like, with the whole, I think, I'm not busy, and, that person said they hate their job, I'm not a wagey like them. Like, we can have those copes sometimes we just need those copes. And like, it can be comfy sometimes, sure, like, like, there's not as much pressure on me to, like, like, work as there is a neurotypical, like, sure, like, I get that. And, there are, like, there is some sympathy out there for people like me, but it's still brutal, like, it's just really brutal, man. That's kind of basically it, I think I pretty much talked about everything I want to talk about today. It's just, like, just feeling so behind because of it, like, it's really bad. Like, like, I don't work full time, right? I'm not a total NEET, but, like, I don't want to get any more personal than that. But, like, there are people who are, like, who have a second job and then work in their second job as much as I do, or, like, like, they're in uni and like, it's a side gig, right? Like, my life is a side gig to most people, and that really hurts my self-esteem as well. And that's one thing that, like, like, boomers, and they say, like, oh, like, having a career could be good for your self-esteem and stuff. Like, they're right about that, of course they are. But just they're wrong about everything else. Like, it's just so much misunderstanding out there. And I feel deep, like, I just feel bad about myself for it all, and Yeah, I really hope that, society will kind of realize like how dire the employment statistics are for people like me, and how we need need more understanding and or just more like support to kind of move forward in life, really. Because that's the thing, like people like autists, we're like man children, really, or or like women children if you're a female autist. But and yeah, I guess just to round this off, like I want to say, like, to people who are autistic and neat, like, I don't hold it against you. I totally understand, and I'm really hard on myself for not like being having a career, having a great career like everyone else does and stuff. But like I don't feel the same way about other people. I hold myself to a higher standard on this, and I beat myself up about it. But I don't feel the same way about other autistic people in this position, which is strange, right? And I think it's just some trauma I have, from like comments, like I mentioned, of my granddad and stuff, where I just feel really bad about myself. But when it comes to other people, especially other autistic people, it's like, I get it, and I don't judge you for, being a neat or whatever. It's understandable, to be honest, and I guess maybe I just need to learn to be kinder to myself about this. Because it's just like, it's every day I beat myself up about not living up to society's expectations, and maybe I do just need to say, yeah, fuck society, and, if they're going to be, if I'm excluded from stuff and I'm not given a chance, that's not my fault, Maybe I do need to embrace that attitude more. Maybe that is a healthier attitude than just blaming myself all the time. Because I know that I make content where I kind of criticize society and stuff, and for not like treating people like me right and stuff. But I don't fully believe it. I'm almost more presenting arguments. But maybe I do need to actually take on board my own advice. What I say, and realize that cards are stacked against me, and society never gave me a chance, and continues not to give me a chance, and that's not my fault, and I never asked to be born, and I should just maybe just try and like myself more, and realize it's not all my fault. But I fear for the future. Like, it's still going to be a, like, underemployed loser when I'm 50. Like, fuck, I don't know, man. We don't. It's like I just never got a place in the world. Everyone else did, apart from maybe you guys who are also Spurgs. I was just never really given that opportunity. And I get it, like, I do suffer from social retardation, but, like, at least society pretends that there's a place for everyone and everyone's welcome. And, maybe society needs to work on that more to help people like me. And, I don't know, maybe I'll get a lucky break soon, and stuff, but I might not, I might just be another statistic. And that would be bad. And so, I'm going to wrap up the video now. I hope you found this interesting. Let me know your thoughts on autistic unemployment and homelessness. It's pretty bad, right? Anyway, have a good day if you can, and I'll talk to you again soon.